Hi, I'm Leah Newman. I'm the director and curator of the Van Avery Smith Galleries here at Davidson College. Thanks so much for joining us this morning for our conversation today about outsider art and particularly outsider artists in our current exhibition, True Likeness. We opened this exhibition in late October. The exhibition was co-curated with Tom Stanley, who joins me today. We did have plans to include John Foster, and unfortunately, due to a family illness, he will not be joining us this morning, but we hope to engage him later in the exhibition. I'm going to introduce my co-curator here, and then we'll move into the conversation about the artists. So Tom Stanley earned his MA in Applied Art History and an MFA in Painting from the University of South Carolina, and he served on the faculties of Arkansas College in Batesville, Arkansas, Barry University in Miami, Florida, before returning to the Carolinas, where he was the director of the Waterworks Visual Arts Center in Salisbury, North Carolina. In 1990, he became the first director of Rock Hill's Winthrop University Galleries. And then from 2007 to 2017, he served as the chair of Winthrop's Department of Fine Arts. Tom is an incredible artist. He primarily works in acrylic, on canvas, and on paper, and uses strategies like mechanical drawing, silhouette, and sgraffito in his work. His work has been exhibited at many institutions, including Hodges Taylor Consultancy here in Charlotte, the George Gallery in Charleston, Hampton 3 in Greenville, If Art in Columbia, South Carolina, the Halsey Institute in Charleston, Art Space in Raleigh, SICA in Winston-Salem, the New Orleans Center for the Creative Arts, and then internationally in Berlin, Lausanne, Paris, and Porto, among many other locations. Since 2007, he's also worked on several public art projects. You may have seen the Tom Hunter Station in Charlotte, and has also been a resident artist at the Gibbs Museum of Art in Charleston, a fellow at the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts in Amherst, and was an artist and curator in residence at the McCall Center in Charlotte for 8 months, I think in 2018. He's a recipient of Winthrop University's Medal of Honor in the Arts, and also the Elizabeth O'Neill Verner Award, which is now the South Carolina Governor's Award for the Arts. So welcome, Tom. I should also say a mentor, longtime mentor and friend as well. So before we get too into the conversation, those of you watching in YouTube, Elizabeth, our gallery and collection coordinator, is here with us, and she will be moderating the chat. There is a slight delay in YouTube, so we hope that you will get your questions in the chat early, and we will address those towards the end. So, Tom, we started this process about 2 years ago. And the idea originally, I approached you about curating an exhibition that was specific to outsider art. But then things sort of shifted as the world was shifting. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the general idea of the exhibition.
Well, for sure, it did start as outsider art. And for some reason, it then evolved into an exhibition about portraiture. But as I think the public dialogue and political dialogue became more toxic over the months and years that we were planning the exhibition, it really evolved into an exhibition about identity, social identity, personal identity. And in one sense, it may have been a social statement, but I'm now considering it a celebration of identity. So I think that was important. And the title True Likeness, which of course references the idea of capturing the likeness of someone, either in photography or portraiture of another medium, evolved into what I think is the true likeness that we all possess. So even though we're all very different. So that is, I think, how the exhibition evolved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I want to dig in a little more into some of the thoughts around the outsiders, but I guess maybe we could give a broad overview, just show, I think you have some images of each artist that's in the exhibition.
That's true, thanks.
So I'll just kind of quickly run through the artists in the show. So this is a work, a video still from India Beal, who her piece is called Mock Interview, and it's actually a compiled video where she gathered questions asked of Black women between the ages of 27 and 58. These were questions that were asked to them, discriminatory or sort of racist questions that were asked during interviews. And then for the video, it's sort of a performative work where Beal takes those questions and asks them to white male students that she recruited, 8 students between the age of 20 and 23 in these sort of mock interview or practice interviews. The men knew that they would be asked discriminatory questions, but they really had no idea what these questions would be. So that video is included in the show. You can move ahead. This is one of the works in the exhibition by Antonius Tinbuy. These are really large scale, beautiful, meticulous hand-cut paper. And the idea for Antonius is to really recognize and celebrate the queer Asian American Pacific Islander community that they are a part of. So often highlighting family members, friends rather, sort of this idea of found family. Move ahead. This is a work by Amir Falah. There are 2 in the exhibition. Amir is working atop some turn-of-the-century photographs that he found at an estate sale. This is just one part of the project that he created after gathering all of these objects from this family. And, you know, the idea here is really sort of stripping away or covering up these identifiable features. And I think that gets to a little bit of what Tom was talking about. It sort of transforms people from specific to general and really helps sort of strip away these sort of superficial traits that we often use to define people. Can move ahead. This is a self-portrait of Latoya Ruby Frazier. It's from the Notion of Family series. In the series, she focuses on 3 generations of women in Braddock, Pennsylvania, her hometown. So herself, her mother, and her grandmother. And I think a big part of this project was sort of community resilience and family support, particularly in the midst of systemic racism and sort of like economic decline of a community. This is a work by Juan Fuentes. Juan is a cultural activist, an artist, and printmaker. And this work in particular features his family members. So he traveled to Mexico over the holidays and took tons of photographs of his family. And the idea for him in making this print was really to sort of counter what the news media was perpetuating about folks living in Mexico. Raymond Grubb. So we knew Raymond would be in the show early on, but I think we didn't know exactly which works. And we were really interested in this new practice that he began around the pandemic. So turning the camera inward, focusing on self-portraits like this one here, and also portraits of his partner of 35 years, Tom. So there are 9 works in the exhibition, and they're really sort of about this like private life, sort of a glimpse into someone's private life during this very strange time of seclusion and mindfulness. They've been meditating and taking these long walks and things like that. Oh, I should mention Raymond's an alum also. David's an alum. This is a work by Keough. Holly is also here in Charlotte, and this work and the other piece in the show are from a newer series where she is basically collaborating with her grandfather. She's using found silent film footage her grandfather took, and then sort of pausing them, finding these moments, these individuals, and making paintings of them. And they're folks that she has never met. She only knows through these films, taken before she was born. This is one of 2 works in the exhibition by Debbie Luster. They are photographs that were taken at Angola prison. In this particular series that we focus on in the exhibition, they are from the Angola Prison Drama Club, from their staging of the life of Christ. So there's 2 photographs, both in costume. Angola is sort of known as this notorious place where most folks are serving life sentences or on death row. It's become really known for brutality and riots, and but she's taking these photographs of these individuals in these other moments where they're dressed as other people, and performing. They performed for the public, and there was a live camel in the play as well. This is one work by Cameron Neal that's in the exhibition. So there's a series of stop motion short videos that are sort of explore the Black body, queer identity, self-care, anxiety. And then there's a longer video on display by Cameron that is really the only work in the exhibition that is a portrait composed of words only, that there is not the physical rendering of the body. Deborah Roberts, this is called Venus the Great, and like a lot of Deborah's work, it's composed of several different images. These are all images of Venus Williams when she was a young woman, and usually Deborah sort of focuses on Black girls at a particular age. She says sort of the age when they first become aware of the challenges that they'll face in society that favors white standards of beauty. Just as a note, Deborah will be giving a virtual talk in February, so I hope you'll tune in for that too. Next. This is a work by Wendy Redstar. Wendy is Apsalica or Crow. She actually gave a talk last week, which is available on our YouTube for you to watch. But this work, Apsalica Feminist 1, is from a series, a collaboration, one of many collaborations with her daughter, Beatrice. And really it's about presenting images that counter these sort of stereotypical, expected, biased images of Indigenous women. This is sort of an early view of an installation by Bill Thielen that he installed in the gallery, sort of a self-portrait made up of these different individual drawings and some other objects. And they were all created in lockdown, either while isolating at home or at the beach, and drawing inspiration in the moment, and also from this sort of creation, the drawing rooms Zoom drawing clubs that he started. So it was like an online meeting place for lonely artists to meet on Saturday mornings and draw and talk. And so a lot of the imagery sort of comes out of those moments. And we will also be hosting a Zoom drawing club in February. And then this work by Micheline Thomas. There are two different works in the exhibition by Micheline. There's one that's like a little more expected, kind of known works with these sort of rhinestone embellishments of Condoleezza Rice and Oprah Winfrey. And then there's this photograph, which I guess is like a contemporary sort of updated version of like an odalisque that we might expect in Western art history. So this sort of empowered contemporary woman. So that's all I was going to say. kind of an intro to some of the artists, and then I think you will talk about some other folks before we move into the outsiders.
Yeah, we'll give that a shot. I think the thing that is obvious about what you just presented, Leah, is not only the diversity within the exhibition, but diversity of styles, medium, and also approaches to work. And that was another underlying idea with True Likeness, that we would try to explore those ideas on a broad scale. And many of the artists that you presented, are critically acclaimed, either on a national and international level, or indeed within a region. They've been doing this work for a long time, for sure. I wanted to talk about a couple other artists, first of all, before I get to the outsider. John D Monteith is from Columbia, South Carolina, currently lives there. And the series that I wanted to show you was this yearbook series. I often think that yearbooks are a type of portraiture that are embedded within our culture, or at least were at one time. This is a 1952 image from a Charlotte high school. And John was really playing with this idea for a number of reasons to make us think about the idea of portraiture and this social connection, this rite of passage in some respects, in an almost cynical way. But nonetheless, I thought it was important that these works be considered, at least the yearbook be considered, and in this particular case, from the perspective of the artist. These are oftentimes recollaged so that they become a different type of image than the original yearbook themselves, pages from those yearbooks. Another artist who uses portraiture in a different way, at least in this case, was Chris Sullivan from New Orleans. Chris actually asked people who were attending a conference in Black Mountain to follow the 9 steps to create portraiture that were published in a book that he provided. So they would take a celebrity, famous people. In this case, this 22 famous people is what he is calling his publication. And these come from a publication from 2018, though the actual drawings were done earlier in the 21st century. But this is Groucho Marx by the late Mary Pocock. And so through the 9 steps, the individual gets to a fairly good likeness of the individual. This is Queen Elizabeth by Molly Renda. And here again, getting to a fairly good likeness of the individual. And in a way, Chris is playing with a cynical approach to portraiture that he's collected in his self-published book, which I find pretty interesting. The artist, the collector who wasn't able to be with us today is John Foster. And I just wanted to go through these quickly so you also get an idea of what we were thinking about when we were thinking about portraiture. These are from his collection, which he considers Accidental Mystery, which is actually a publication and a book from an exhibition of the St. Louis Museum of Art. And these are anonymous vernacular photographs. They're obviously were not done digitally, but with a regular amateur hand camera. And he collected them for a variety of reasons, just how one perceives this look, who is the person that is being photographed, who did the photograph, why, and the almost accidental beauty or mystery that exists within each of these photographs. So I just wanted to go through them. And you've probably recognized photographs like this from your childhood, similar to it, the format. I remember that type. This one is very interesting. So you just have to wonder, how did that person get that tall? Some are, of course, exploring the beauty of an individual or the perceived beauty as well, which I find extremely fascinating. And once again, we don't know who they are and where they are coming from, but nonetheless, this is a great one. It provides some mysterious insight into the taker and the subject as well. Okay. The other, as we suggested, the exhibition was originally going to focus upon outsider art, but that changed drastically. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the artists in the exhibition who we might consider outsider artists, bearing in mind that in the same way that we were trying to question the idea of labels and how we perceive people within society, I have to admit, I have some questions about what is oftentimes called term warfare with regard to self-taught artists. Are they outsiders, are art brute, folk, whatever the case might be. I prefer to think of them as excellent artists in many respects. My interest in this work began in probably the 1970s when I traveled up and down the East Coast from New Jersey back to South Carolina and North Carolina. And we'd always stop in Washington, D.C. and typically visit the Smithsonian. I stumbled upon this work in the American Art Museum on 8th and G Street next to the National Portrait Gallery. This is James Hampton's throne, also referred to as the throne of the third heaven of the nation's Millennium General Assembly. That was the title that Mr. Hampton gave it. When I saw this installed in the museum, I was awestruck, as you can well imagine. It's made out of collected tinfoil, found furniture, covered light bulbs. As I dug deeper into how this came about, it was made in a rented garage in Washington. And he would hire children in the neighborhood to collect tinfoil and bring it to him, or he'd find used furniture and find other used elements. The light bulbs probably came from his job. He was, at night, he worked as a janitorial assistant for the government. So changing light bulbs was one of the jobs that came with that territory. But he made it into a spiritual and a visionary masterpiece, as it's now considered today. No one really knew that he was making this phenomenal piece, and it was actually saved by members of the Smithsonian, as well as artists like Robert Rauschenberg, after it was found and discovered. And one reason, perhaps, that people knew it, and this is a colorized image, I apologize for that, but there was a reporter who was going to do a story about his work in his garage, and this is a photograph by that reporter, and he questioned its authenticity, or it was also going to, in a sense, poke fun at Hampton. But Hampton was very serious about this, and his work was saved and is now part of the permanent collection of the Smithsonian. Was not done and collected until after his death. There's speculation why he made it. Did he make it because he thought the end was near? Some people speculate that when he retired, it was going to become part of a storefront church in Washington. So it all remains to be seen. All I know is that it's probably a masterpiece of visionary art in this country. So that initiated some of my interest in this work. And what even stimulated it further was in learning more about James Hampton. He was born in Ellery, South Carolina. So by coincidence, I was getting ready to go to graduate school in South Carolina. And I thought to myself, well, there must be more artists like this man. And that began part of my journey through graduate school. When I wasn't attempting to paint, I would do research and try to identify other artists in the two states to see what I could find. And what was more interesting than anything was being able to visit and talk to these individual artists and to see what they had made, whether it be individual objects or environments. One of the first artists I came across, and this was Dot Hodges and Christy Taylor told me about this artist in Marshville, North Carolina, James Bright Bailey. And he was one of the first artists I had a chance to really talk to. And in his retirement, he began carving people he had known, he had memories of. And there's a similarity to them all, and that became very obvious. And there's a similar technique that he would utilize in this, and that is oftentimes typical of the artists I began to work with. Not always. There's nothing monolithic about their approach to work. It's always very individualistic. But what it is, I found fascinating about it is how alive the work was. So these are some of Mr. Bailey's figures. Another artist I literally stumbled across was Marion Hamilton, who lived in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. Unfortunately, I never met Mr. Hamilton. I met his Mrs. Hamilton, who still lived in the house where they lived. And this painting, I first saw it was on two 4x4 posts attached to the post on the outside of his house, like many of the works that he had done. He worked in the Charleston Naval Yard, the shipyard, as a painter, painting and repainting the ships, keeping up maintenance. During his lunch hour, he would take a stick in the stand and began to draw some of the vessels and the boats. And as time went on, he began to think, well, maybe I can actually paint them. And that he did. And he would post these paintings on the outside of his house to help, enliven the neighborhood and help people realize that he was okay and he wanted them to be okay. So he was a fixture in his neighborhood in Mount Pleasant. This painting was called City Within a City, and it indeed focuses upon the sea traffic in Charleston. Those of you who are old enough may recall the Cooper River Bridge, which is at the bottom when it was only 2 lanes, and the lighthouse, the side porch, which is typical of Charleston. So this becomes an important document about Charleston built environment and cultural history as much as anything from a particular perspective. It was painted on a 4x8 sheet of plywood. And now it's in the collection of South Carolina State Museum. And I'm only looking at some of the artists that I became acquainted with. This is this is L.C. Carson, who lived in Orangeburg, South Carolina. And this is his concrete city that was in his backyard in Orangeburg, which he made over a long period of time. He also did unbelievable carving, relief carving. But his concrete city was the beginning of it all. Mr. Carson actually owned a construction company. And as he said, he made row houses for people. And he would get somewhat bored by that or disenchanted with that and wanted to go further. So he became extremely interested in travel and architecture of other places. So over to the left, you can probably see the Parthenon and its columns. You can probably see, you'll see there's the Roman Colosseum is in this mix, basilicas. And it was an unbelievable and fascinating work that he had created over a period of time, using many of his construction skills and the materials that he also used in construction that he was well aware of. The interesting thing about this piece is, as time went on, Mr. Carson said, well, when I'm gone, no one's going to care about this at all when they buy this property, and it will go away. So there was a concerted effort by the South Carolina State Museum and others to actually save this piece. So all the pieces were saved and moved to the State Museum in Columbia. And I do believe conservation work is still ongoing to preserve these works because some of them are fragile, even though they're made out of concrete. But it was just great to get to know Mr. Carson and to have a chance to interview him and over time and get a feeling about what he was about. One of the artists in the exhibition, Dan Robert Miller, didn't live too far from Mr. Carson and actually drove a construction truck for Mr. Carson's company, which was totally ironic. But Dan Robert Miller did large carvings, oftentimes large carvings, as you can see right here. The image on the right is from his home. There's a portrait of him with this carving, and this is his portrait of JFK, RFK, and MLK. All political figures, all instrumental in human rights and trying to, consider the rights of Black people in this country, and all assassinated. So, and when I say it represents all three, what becomes extremely interesting about this freestanding figure is the faces on them, and you see two faces here, and here you can see all three. They're mask-like, and they're very, very much reminiscent of perhaps an African mask that we may be familiar with. And when Miller was shown books of African art, he said it was very interesting, but there was no clue where this actually came from. This came from his imagination and as he suggested, dreams that he'd had when he knew what he had to do after serious illness. This is what he began to do, was create these unbelievable carvings. This was featured not only in an exhibition that I did during graduate school called Worth Keeping Found Artists of the Carolinas, but it went on to be in the inaugural exhibition of the Visionary Art Museum in Baltimore, the American Visionary Art Museum, along with other works that he had done. But, you know, if you look at this work closely, you see the detail in it, how he has indented areas to create texture, the polychrome element of it, usually painted with auto paints, the detail that is involved in that. This is his Abraham Lincoln, which is also in the exhibition, his portrait of Abraham Lincoln. I've often wondered how he suggested that it was Lincoln, but we must take his word for it. And oftentimes I think his portraits, especially of these figures, were also referencing, you know, here another figure who was assassinated, referencing his own interest in his own, you know, equal justice and his own rights within the community. Bearing in mind, he lived all of his life in rural South Carolina. He picked cotton, he drove trucks, did basically odd jobs to make a living for his family. So from another time and another era. The work is so powerful in so many ways. In this particular case, this reclining figure. A piece that wasn't in the exhibition, which is one of my favorites, is his image of March and April. You know, if you can get an idea of that, I think when you know the title, you can certainly sense what that is about. In this case, March and April. And in this figure, you get a better sense of the textural quality that he applied to the work. Another artist in the exhibition was Sam Doyle, who at this point in time is certainly internationally known for his work that he did on St. Helena Island. This is Unc Sam and Dr. YB. In this case, is York Bailey, Dr. York Bailey. The portrait of Dr. York Bailey comes from his series of First Black series, as it's often called. His family moved to New York. He stayed in St. Helena Island and began to paint portraits. And he became interested in his community and tried to paint people in his African-American community on St. Helena Island, which were also loosely part of the Gullah culture there, the first series. So Dr. Bailey was the first African-American in his community to become a doctor. He got his degree in Washington, D.C., and came back to serve his community and was also a deacon in his church as well as the doctor. Doyle painted a number of self-portraits referred to as Unc Sam as this. And so in that case, Unc Sam is painted on discarded plywood, and Dr. Bailey is painted on recycled roofing tin, which was often that he used in his work. that he would find. He would set it out on the road and have cars run up and down it to flatten it out until it was ready to be painted upon. And he would display these, interestingly enough, he would display these works in a similar fashion that Marion Hamilton displayed his works on his Mount Pleasant home. They would be displayed outside of his home and what he called the National Wide Outdoor Art Gallery. And he influenced and wanted people to stop and talk about the work. He would oftentimes sell the work. And sometimes people would be disappointed when he painted the same subject again, but that was what he did. And it's just, they're amazing in their own right for a variety of reasons. And I have a friend who I've worked with off and on with regard to work like this. His name is Roger Manley. He's now the director of the Gregg Museum at NC State.
Also a Davidson alum.
Oh yes, another Davidson alum. and the thing about it was I loved his definition of this work. You know it when you see it. And that's all I can say is that you talk about self-taught artists. There are a lot of us people are self-taught artists. I am, part of me is that as well, as most artists are. But there's something about this work, the energy in it, the humanity in it, that just takes it to another level, which I think is very critical, and one reason why these works are included in the exhibition in terms of their portraiture as well.
Tom, could I ask a question about
Sure.
Sam Doyle? And I don't know if you know this answer, but the Ankh Sam, what does that refer to?
Well, that's a good question. I've tried to find that out, and I have no clear answer to that. I often think that might refer to him referring to himself as Uncle Sam, but then again, I am not totally sure. I've tried to find that out and even contacted the Gibbs and don't have a clear answer on that. If anyone knows, I'd like to know.
Let us know.
Yeah, please let us know. But it's not the only Ankh Sam painting that he did. There was a number as well. Another artist I wanted to talk about who's in the exhibition is Gene Merritt. Full name is Clyde Eugene Merritt. Mr. Merritt was born in Columbia, South Carolina in 1936, and he passed away in York, South Carolina in 2015, rather. This is many of the images I'm going to show in here, at least the photographs, with the exception of a couple, were taken by Mario Del Corto, who's a Swiss photographer who came to Rock Hill, South Carolina to photograph Gene Merritt in his environment, his various environments. Here is a portrait of Gene. And also here he is in Watkins Grill on Main Street, where he would go every morning to draw. He would walk there from his trailer home on Confederate Avenue in Rock Hill. And when he would walk there, he would make various stops along the way at different businesses he would visit, and he would collect business cards at those businesses. And so he would go to Watkins Grill to draw, and this was his job. And he, as a result, considered himself an artist, and his drawings were almost like business cards in a sense. He would try to leave Watkins Grill before lunchtime, before it got too busy, because I think he liked the quiet and the uninterrupted nature of Watkins before it got too crowded there. You can see Watkins was a museum in and of itself, because on its walls, it displayed memorabilia from people who would visit there, or memorabilia about Rock Hill. Political leaders within the community would go there. Business people would go there. It was, your typical breakfast and lunch joint, and Gene went there as well. And he would try to sell his drawings there at Watkins Grill or during his walks in Rock Hill. And he would sell them for whatever, a quarter, whatever. But for him, it was very important that he tried to sell them. at some level, because it did become his business. Gene, as an infant, had a high fever, an extended high fever for a while. And so as a result, he had some mild organic brain damage, and it rewired him in a way, I suspect. But he was a very gentle and kind soul, and to the best of my knowledge, would never had an aggressive bone in his body, though I did see him get mad several times. I met Gene around in 2000, no, excuse me, I get my centuries mixed up, in 1992 at the Grill, and became his friend until his death in 2015. This is the owner of Watkins Grill with Gene. The thing about it is he was well accepted there. If he didn't have money, they would give him a hot dog, coffee, whatever, to sustain him, because he only received about $30 a month from the state. He was essentially a ward of the state. And as I said, he would walk back to his trailer home, and his trailer home was behind another house. And those people who lived in that house were his adult foster care individuals who helped care for him in theory. But I would never want to live in that trailer. Like I said, Gene would walk different places. On the left is Gene at the barber shop, and at the right at Saluda Motors. So he would walk all these and get to know all of these people. That's where he got his haircut. He liked Saluda Motors because he liked the cars there as well. And people embraced Gene. And as I said, Gene collected business cards everywhere he went. Eventually, the owner of Saluda Motors made Gene his own business card. So Gene was, in some respects, embraced by the community. In other respects, he may not have been. It just depended. This is Gene on the left at the pawn shop, on the right at the dry cleaning, places that he would often go. The pawn shop was important to Gene because that's where he would periodically pawn his guitar, which he played, and somehow he'd get it back periodically. But that was an important part of Gene when the pawn shop was on Main Street. As I said, business cards were very important to Gene. He collected them. Oftentimes on the back of the business cards, he would write his own name as well. Gene Merritt Arts, which eventually became part of his moniker. And that was his briefcase that you also see on the table, which he left at Watkins Grill in a safe place with his drawing materials in it so that it was always there and he didn't have to carry it along the street. These are some of Gene's early drawings these are from August 1993. One on the left are what he would call cartoons. And sometimes they were identified specifically in these early drawings. And there you see he drawn by Gene Merritt, summer, August 1993. And these have balloon captions as well. So you can see where they're coming from in terms of being cartoon-like. Then on the right is his image of Frank Sinatra, it's a great drawing. In this case, these were all done obviously on lined paper. And so these illustrate some of his early work. Too many fingers there, but that's okay. These are works that were illustrated in a Raw Vision publication. I do believe they're really great drawings, and they kind of suggest some of Gene's work when he was really working with the body in a particular way. There you see Worldwide Wrestling. I assume this is and he's suggesting this is at the Winthrop Coliseum. So the wrestler, you see their muscles and face are divided up, and he would draw these in very methodical, puzzle-like fashion, going from one area to the next, almost in a very symmetrical way, to draw what he considered to be the muscles that distinguished the body. And like fashion with Spider-Man, you see the same puzzle-like approach to that particular drawing. I'm not sure why Perry Mason is also labeled on there, but it is. You see at the bottom, these drawings from probably 1998. Gene had now developed what he called his autograph into Gene's Arts Incorporated. And he called it his autograph as opposed to his signature. And that's why I also suggest that these were like his business cards, because it did become Gene Arts Incorporated. And all of his work is signed and labeled in this particular way, bracketed, underlined, quotes. And it becomes a very distinguishing element within Gene's work. This is a photograph by Mariel del Corto. He traveled with us down to Columbia, South Carolina. This must be the mid-1990s. We went down to see Gene's aunt. This is Aunt Merritt, her son. They're in their living room. I'm standing in the background, different time and place. There is Gene, and behind Gene is Geneviève Roulin, who traveled over to see Gene from Lausanne, Switzerland, the collection of l'Art Brut in Lausanne. She was assistant director, curator at the collection in Lausanne. It was actually hired by Dubuffet. When Jean Dubuffet took the collection to Lausanne, they accepted his collection of Art Brut, and he began his museum there. And so she had an interesting connection to modernism in that respect. And why is she there? That's a good question. I had met Geneviève at one of the same conferences that some of those artists were in Black Mountain. And shortly after that, I said, well, I'm going to send her a drawing of Gene's. So I think I sent her a drawing of maybe JFK. I don't know. It might have been JFK. But I sent her a drawing of that, and about a month or so later, she was on a plane back over to the US to meet Gene. Because she asked about him, and just work I've been collecting. But the thing about Gene that's very interesting, he has no real outside art influence. All of his work totally comes from, as he suggested, from his head, from his brain. And if he works too long, his brain would hurt. But that is where it comes from. If it has an influence, it comes from popular culture or from his watching of television more than anything else, or movies that might have been on television. And he has a phenomenal memory. When we went to see his aunts in Columbia, I had no idea where we were going, and he had not been to Columbia in years, but he knew their phone number and their address. And so we were able to get there without much problem and surprise them with this visit. And this was typical of the work that the collection, the l'Art Brut from Lausanne, collected of Gene's. And I know it's theirs because of the color guide off to the side. This is the Price is Right host, Bob Barker, from 1997, from Gene's Art Incorporated. So most of Gene's work would have as much information on it like that as possible to not only identify the subject, but provide additional details like this in his writing. Sometimes the spelling is a little off, but it all makes sense for sure. This is the Keystone Cop. And this is typical of one of Gene's profiles. I often thought that many times, and this becomes more evident later on, that the profiles were totally done from memory, and sometimes the frontal views would also incorporate his observational drawing to some extent. And we'll probably see that a little bit later. This is Gene's 1996 portrait of me. And there are many portraits of me. And they're all different and they all changed. And I don't know where the hair came from, but nonetheless.
What's the Blue Boys?
What?
What's the blue?
That came after my colleague Al Ford and I were playing downtown once. And Gene referred to us as the Blues Boys or the Blue Boys. And I believe that's where it came from.
Harmonica.
Yeah. And so Gene would always have other elements within the drawings to identify, in this case, musical notes to help embellish his drawings in some particular way. And this one is kind of typical too of what is almost his cubist approach to profiles, because the way you can see both the right and left eye almost in a similar fashion. So his sense of perspective was skewed in a way, but which really made his drawings come alive in a totally different way. And this is newsman Colin Ferguson, also referencing his interest in television. How news will travel in deep space news. That's what I love about, sometimes he will just go on within his writing and his text on these, just like Ed Sullivan show, which even makes them more interesting and provides some insight into his particular vision of popular culture, which is his vision. Gene's work was fairly well accepted in Europe, interestingly enough, and also places like Japan, where there's a great deal of interest in collecting outsider art. But not so much in the United States, I don't think. Gene's work was never really accepted that much. He is in a lot of some collections here. And I often felt that there was a reason, because he did focus upon popular culture so much, most people were aware of that. His work doesn't have that colorful edge like a lot of Southern outsider or folk art has, but it's drawing, and it's, as Genevieve often described it, as being more cerebral than other work she had come across in the South. And I've often tried to understand exactly what she meant by that, and I'm still trying to figure that out. But nonetheless, in Europe, Gene was more popular because though Europeans might not enjoy American politics, they loved American popular culture.
Mm-hmm.
On the left is a self-portrait of Gene, and there are hundreds of self-portraits that he did of himself, and they all basically look like this. And that also references his hand memory, his memory in general, and how he worked with drawings. That, of course, is James Cagney, Skipper Without a Crew. And that's referencing classic film, from, in this case, from Turner Movie Classics. As I say, he would often be in his trailer home and watch television all night. I would go by there sometimes and I'd knock on the trailer door, and he couldn't hear me because the television was so loud, so I just gave up. Also on the far right is a portrait, his self-portrait, Gene Merritt, the arts man, self-employed man here at home. The idea of working and having a certain degree of respect as a working person is extremely important to Gene. And I think that's partly why he made so many drawings so consistently. If he were at home, at his trailer home at the kitchen table, he could draw a whole series of drawings in one night, as oftentimes was the case. These are some additional drawings. This is wildcat growing pains. And I love this drawing on the far left. It's indicative of a style he began to evolve through observational drawing. And here the hair is so beautifully stylized in this case, And there's Bruce Willis in the middle, going back to that construction of the muscle structure. And in that drawing, and in those two drawings, you will see how his autograph, as he calls it, has evolved to Gene's Art Museums Incorporated. He had shown it in Switzerland, and he knew Genevieve, who was his friend, and so he elevated his signature, or as he called it, his autograph, to Gene's Arts Museums Incorporated. And then a drawing on the far right, Anybody's Guy. There again, and then up above that, you'll see in a lot of his work, you'll see the sun, you'll see the clouds, and those M's. A lot of people want to know what the M's are. Those are birds, which are flying throughout many of his drawings as well. Randy Travis, Ricky Nelson. A lot of his work focused upon music, country stars, rock and roll stars, in many cases. And here again, he goes further, identifying it with the musical notes, guitars, records within the work. These are later drawings. Gene went from living in his trailer home on Confederate Avenue in Rock Hill to being one of the first residents at Pilgrim's Inn, which was a nonprofit organization which originally built cottages, small duplexes for battered women and their children. But they accepted Gene because the director knew Gene. And Gene lived there for a while. He had some of his most productive years there, but because it was further away from Watkins Grill, he stopped walking there. And so there was a restaurant around the corner he would go to, but he began collecting more and more magazines and drawing from observation from magazines, and using these frontal views and drawing what he considered to be beautiful women. And the drawing on the left is Gina at her best. And Gina was the director of Pilgrim's Inn. But I'm sure this came from a magazine. He named it Gina. Both of these are Gina. But what became interesting about these was another thing that Gene did with the money that he earned from his drawings, or the money that he received in his check every month. He would go out and buy lipstick and fingernail polish. Sometimes he would use it on himself, but mainly to give to his girlfriends or women that he knew from Pilgrim's Inn or other places. And in these drawings, he, with colored marker or colored pencil, he almost makes these figures up. Well, he makes them up by coating their fingers with fingernail polish, putting their lipstick on, putting their eyeliner on. So he makes them up in a sense to make them, from his perspective, more beautiful. There is a photograph by Mario from Watkins Grill with his cup of coffee. There he is in Pilgrim's Inn at the kitchen table doing his drawings. And he always, that's what I found very interesting. And I'm not sure about this, but at Watkins Grill, he did his drawing at a dining room table, at the table where he ate. In his trailer home, he did it from the kitchen table, and here in Pilgrim's Inn, he did it from his kitchen table. I won't suggest that there's a parallel here, but when Gene was about 12 years old in Columbia, his mother committed suicide by turning on the gas in their apartment, put her head down on the kitchen table. And that's how he lost his mother. And shortly after that, he and his father moved to Fort Mill. And eventually Gene, after his father's death, found himself a ward of the state and living in Rock Hill. There is Gene at Yorktown Village. When Pilgrim's Inn was no longer able to care for Gene, he went to assisted living at Yorktown Village. And the collection of Art Brut continues to stay in touch with him. There he is holding a catalog that he's in one of their exhibitions called Vehicles, because Gene also drew a lot of cars, which is not in this exhibition, because it's not portraiture. But you can see he's getting older. At that time, we began, because his hearing was basically lost, I communicated with Gene by using note cards. And so here he is saying hello to Paul Metheny. And I sent that to Paul because he hadn't seen Paul in a long time. And so he wanted to say hi.
So Paul is the chief curator at the South Carolina State Museum.
Yeah.
Also had lived in Rock Hill and has,
Yeah, so that is how it's communicated in that case. And here's a photograph of Gene by Paul Metheny. So with that, that's what I have to say about Gene at this point in time. And when Gene passed away in 2015, I was at that time his medical guardian, and he died very suddenly, but I suspect he was getting weaker all the time. And we had a very nice celebration for Gene at St. Mary's Catholic Church, which I chose St. Mary's Catholic Church because across the street from it was the soup kitchen, where Gene would visit many times, where he got his food early on in his existence in Rock Hill, and his ashes are interred there at St. Mary's, and it was a nice celebration. A lot of people came. Paul was there. A lot of people were there.
He made a lot of friends on his walks.
He developed a lot of friends, and was, was a good person in his own right, for sure. And interestingly enough, he's everywhere right now. So that's another good thing. His life goes on in his drawings.
Yeah. So that was really great to have sort of a look at the outsiders in the exhibition, but then also sort of a deep dive into Gene. And so I guess my one question that's come up is, as a curator, your role is to help other artists. And clearly your relationship with Gene was based on friendship as well. But you wanted to help get his work seen internationally. But as an artist, though, too, I mean, it's an interesting thing. Like, these are the things that all artists want, right? Is to get your work out there, to get it seen. You really helped that happen for Gene, right? Like, and some of the outsiders are definitely, you've shown, are doing this work for themselves. He wanted to get his work out there. He wanted to sell his work. It was important for him to have sort of a career and a job. I'm just thinking about how much money, how much time and energy you put into Gene's work to help him build that career without return for yourself.
Well, that's pretty interesting. I mean, it got to the point we did sell some of his work, like the Collectional Art Group actually paid for some work. I think the State Museum may have, I don't recall. But we would turn around and feed the money back to Gene. Didn't give it to him because it would be spent on fingernail polish. We would buy groceries for Gene or buy other things that he needed, because he was never going to make a living off of the work necessarily. So we tried to help in that way. And it was beneficial to me from the standpoint that though Gene never traveled, he never wanted to travel or leave Rock Hill, that he would go to Columbia. But for me, I was able to go to Lausanne, was able to go to Tokyo to talk about his work. So that was, people actually wanted me to do that. So I was happy to do it. It was great to be able to do that indeed. My interest in getting Gene's work out there, and also I think some of the work I did with earlier artists, was I've often felt that a lot of people go unnoticed. A lot of artists go unnoticed, and people in general also go unnoticed within our community, who oftentimes make their own significant contributions. They may not be in a position of privilege, but they shouldn't go. They need to be seen, and we need to understand where they're coming from as much as anything. And I think that's one of the reasons why in a portrait exhibition, artists like this were also included, to be able to see a different perspective of what portraiture is about. And I think that's extremely important, to be able to come to some understanding of that. And that's why I think oftentimes in developing our understanding of a broader world, artists may be very accessible in imparting that message. It's just that we've got to slow down and take our eyes off of television and look a little bit. So I think that's part of it. So I've really enjoyed that. And right now I'm in the process of trying to get his work into collections. You know, it's there. I want people to have it. I'm not, you know, it's not for sale. But trying to get collections to accept the work so it can have a broad opportunity so people will have an opportunity to see it in different locations. So one step at a time. Right now, I'm cataloging some work for the collection in Lausanne. I'm getting his selection of his early work to them in hopes that it might become an exhibition as well. So it's keeps my hands busy as well. And Jean meant a lot to me. Jean, enlivened my life for a long time, for sure.
That's really nice. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the idea of like combining different artists together, trained, untrained, artists that were more acclaimed, artists that are more emerging. I think when we were thinking about the show, I don't know that we were like ticking boxes at all, but I feel like when we started looking at the list, it felt like just the sort of natural interests, like our interests combined, it came up with a pretty diverse list. And I do think that it's really important that this like combination, for younger, more emerging artists, hopefully being in an exhibition with more acclaimed artists is empowering and helpful in their career. And then I think for viewers, just looking at these diverse perspectives, I think that was really important.
And that's why I can only encourage people to go on your website and make an appointment at the times in December and January when the gallery will be open to everyone else, but you have to make an appointment to see the show, because it's like these artists are having a conversation that they've never had before. Oh, you're over there. I've never met you before. So I think that in and of itself becomes fascinating and worth a chance to see that visual conversation as well.
Yeah. So folks can come to the gallery in December and January. There's also an expanded website with some more information. And then, as mentioned, some of these artist programs. But another question. So LC Carson, you mentioned that he had a desire for the work to be saved. I know Jean, certainly wanted to see this as a career and hoped for the work to be viewed. I love that he added that museum language to his signature, his autograph. But I'm curious, like, given the context of so much outsider art, like how it's made and it's made outside of the art world and art market, how do you sort of balance these ideas of preserving and exhibiting and bringing attention to these artists without, while also sort of respecting the artist's wish or desire for the work? I mean, I'm thinking about Sam Doyle. I don't know what his career was sort of like when he was alive, but he certainly, his work has taken off, but he had his own exhibit gallery, right, on the side of his house. So
well, he started being noticed for sure, but there were galleries in that part of the country that became aware, and they helped other people become aware for sure. But that's a good question. I think that with a few exceptions, I'm sure there's some exceptions. These, like anyone else, these artists wanted to be accepted on some level, and they wanted to share their work with other people. The first time I ran across the work of where's my mind? Dan Robert Miller was in an exhibition of an arts council, okay, in rural South Carolina, and they and what was interesting about this is they labeled the work with letters, so you could get it, but the letters were stapled to the work on a little piece of paper, so they wouldn't fall. They were actually stapled, and I looked at that and said, But that was the nature of that situation at that time. But Miller wanted his work to be seen, and early on, after the exhibition Worth Keeping, the State Museum and the Columbia Museum and the South Carolina Arts Commission all negotiated to purchase his work from him while he was still alive, because he was no longer making anymore. And the same with, L.C. Carson. With the exception of the work that was that his family kept, essentially the State Museum accepted as much as they could so it would be preserved. So it was after conversations with him that this was able to happen. And there were other artists from Worth Keeping, the same is the case. They would donate their work much of their work to the State Museum, so it could be have a lasting life. And I think they wanted that to happen. Certainly there are some artists who go unnoticed, go unknown, and in some cases are very recluse, and that may not be the case, but that's just the personality of the person. Like I said, these artists are not part of a monolithic idea. They're all very different, and they all have different goals in mind. It's just that they come from another side of the tracks in a sense, or they exist in another world that isn't an art world, or attuned to the comings and goings of the art world that sometimes we know, sometimes that we try to avoid, whatever the case might be.
And often can be really influential on artists' work in a sometimes detrimental way.
Oh, exactly. There are artists. I know an artist who recently died. I won't mention his name, but who I visited down in South Carolina once, who wasn't in the Worth Keeping exhibition. But I would go to this person. We met the artist, and they said, "Go see so and so." We went. I think it was Paul and I. We went to the trailer to go see this person, and they were literally manufacturing his work. Yeah, because the simplicity of the work was easy to replicate in some respects, and so Paul and I just looked at each other and walked away. So, there are instances like that too that can be unfortunate, but that is the case occasionally. So there are instances like that, and also the other issue, there are instances of artists who have literally been picked over. Someone knows about them. So-called art pickers will go there and try to buy all of the work for basically nothing, and then resell it on a different market. Mm-hmm. That's a different story. So I've been trying to deal with museums whenever possible to just have the work collected at this point.
Well, thank you for the work that you have done to help preserve and show these artists' work from South Carolina, North Carolina. It's really important.
Well, it's added something to what I do, but and has influenced what I do on some level, mainly from the standpoint of attitude and approach to work, and how that all combines with what you do on a daily basis. So that's okay. And being part of this exhibition project has also been extremely important to me to kind of revive some of these ideas within my mind and how they relate to what I'm doing. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. If there's any other thoughts?
Not at this time.
Well, thank you. And we'll keep the conversation going as we, especially after the holidays. This is the last program that we'll have before the semester break. But as Tom mentioned, there are lots of public days for folks to come by, and then we'll ramp back up again with some more programs in the winter. So
yeah, there's some great artists in the exhibition. I really hope people will take advantage of it. Yeah.
Me too. Thank you so much for your help working on this project. It's I feel like you've been a mentor for so long, and I realize working with you on this project, I realized some things and the way that my brain works a little bit, I hope could be somewhere near where your level of curatorial work. And so it's just been really fun to collaborate.
I've learned more than you have. Okay. So.
No.
Yes, I have.
Thanks so much. I'll see you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.